Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the final webinar of Enterprise Cybersecurity Fundamentals, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University, or CSU. My name is Guy Coward, and I'll be your MC tonight, and your mentor is of course Matt Constable, who you've heard from for the last 3 weeks and will again hear from shortly. As always, before we begin, just some housekeeping, beginning with Zoom functions. As usual, we ask that your direct questions about content directly. I'll start again. Questions relating to course content. Can you please put them in the Q&A section? And Matt and I will look after those. And if you have any administrative type questions, chuck them in the chat function, where Diane, as usual, is on hand to look after them. And if you're asking questions so far about the exams, we'll get to that soon. In fact, I'll go to it now. Why not? The course exam will be available to you all soon. I'll put it up on Good Friday and let people have a little longer than usual. Normally we just have a week, but I think we'll have more like, 12 days. You'll have until 11:59 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. No, it'll be Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 11th of April to complete it. So you'll have until midnight Wednesday week to complete it, Australian time, and you are required to complete all participation hurdle quizzes before you can access the exam and therefore earn your certificate. The quizzes are hurdle participation hurdles only. So you just need to pass those, and you can attempt those as many times as you want before being able to access the exam, and then you can jump on after that. Again, the weekly quizzes can be done until the 11th of April, but we recommend not leaving it until the last moment, because you'll have to do all of the quizzes, sort of get your head right, get all the information you need from the readings, and then sit the exam. And we really think that leaving it to the last moment is probably not the best idea. The exam consists of 40 multiple choice questions, which you'll have 1 hour to complete. Please note that the exam can only be attempted once, unlike the weekly quizzes, but it is open book, so you can save your progress and go and have a look at some readings or whatever you need to do, and then come back to it. If you leave the page, the hour countdown timer will continue. It can't be stopped once it's begun. So again, don't attempt the exam until you're certain you're ready, or as ready as you're likely to be able to get in the time that you have. A reminder email will be sent out, and if you have any technical difficulties, please email us at shortcourses@itmasters.edu.au as soon as possible within the exam period. We've just started having an auto reply for that one. But we do still receive them, so if there's any exam issues, we'll act as swiftly as we can for that. For more information, you can head to the Moodle page. There's how do I qualify for a certificate pages in the course program, and that'll have all of the information that I've just laid out in better detail and more eloquently. And once you have completed the course, the exam and course, we'd really appreciate if you took a couple of extra minutes to complete the course satisfaction survey at the bottom of the IT Masters course page, underneath the exam content. This survey just contains a few questions relating to the short course and takes only a couple of minutes. Your answers are anonymous and they're reviewed like your weekly feedback. At the conclusion of the short course, at the conclusion of the exam period, I'll have a look at it and try and implement any useful constructive criticism and try and make processes better in the future. It's really valuable, and we think, and I hope, it makes future short courses better. There's also information for those interested in further study on the course page. If you've really enjoyed Matt's short course, as I have, there's a bunch of details as to if you're interested in taking it further and maybe enrolling in a master degree or just getting more information on what CSU offers and the subject in particular. You can find that down there too. We hope you've enjoyed it. and we hope you've been getting a lot out of it. And if you have, well feel free to have a look at what's there for you in the future. But I think that's more than enough out of me and enough CSU talk. So I'll hand you over to Matt now, and hopefully that can avoid the crowd outside being heard over the microphone if you can hear him. So thank you. Here's Matt.
Thanks, Guy. As ever, great intro. I'll just answer a couple of quick questions live while they've popped up. So first one from Luke about the exam, is it based on the lecture content or readings as well? Only the webinar slides. So the slide decks that you have access to, the questions are specifically based around that material that we've spoken about out of those slides. Okay, so the readings are necessary to maybe help build your understanding, to help you interpret some of the questions, but the actual questions themselves are taken strictly from the webinar slides. And in terms of the date opening for the exam, that will be Good Friday, so this Friday, 30th of March. Okay, so that clears that up. So let's get into the content for this evening. So what we're going to look at this evening is a little bit, well actually quite a lot, on physical security principles and concepts, and some ideas on the sorts of things that are physical security and what that actually involved. It's one of those areas that is often not overlooked, but sort of forgotten a little bit to the side, particularly by us as, you know, IT administrators or network administrators or security people who tend to spend more of our day-to-day sort of operational stuff immersed in the digital technology of security rather than the actual physical side of it. Physical security is often within the domain of the facilities managers. But it's really, really important that we understand that. And in some cases, it may be part of our key job description as well. So the content there is relatively straightforward, but does make up quite a few slides. So I'm going to try to get through that as quickly as possible within reason, and then have a look at the risk analysis, risk mitigation, and DR and BCP, which I think is again something that's quite often overlooked and not always understood by security people with more of a technical bend in their work rather than general overall sort of approach to security. So we'll have a look at that as well. So physical security really addresses design, implementation, and maintenance of mechanisms that protect physical resources of an organization. So it's less about the digital aspects and more about the actual physical bits and pieces that we're trying to protect, like our servers and our switches and our data cabinets and our power sources, and controlling heating, ventilation, and humidity, those sorts of things. Because it's important to note that most of the other technical controls can be circumvented or rendered useless if an attacker gains physical access to our systems. So physical security is every bit, if not potentially more important than our logical or a digital security. And that's why, you know, I think it is one of those things where it's often undervalued, because more often than not in most organizations, certainly that I've worked for over the last 20 odd years, the physical security has been within the realm of the facilities manager or the data center manager rather than within the specific security team. And while that's probably right 99% of the time, as security professionals, we need to have an understanding and appreciation of these aspects and how it feeds into our job and helps us. So there are a number, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the sources of physical loss that physical security mechanisms protect against. So things like temperature extremes, so things getting too hot or too cold. We all know that digital devices have a recommended operating range of temperatures, and if things fall above or below that, then issues can be encountered. So that's obviously temperature and humidity control in particular are really important aspects of any sort of physical environment. Gases as well, again, due to damage to physical environment. We'll talk about that more as we go along. Liquids clearly are going to be bad for electronic type equipment. Organics, so again, potentially through rodent infestations or other sort of animals, organics can create an issue. and other things which we'll have a look at. Projectiles. So when I say projectiles, not literally people coming in and throwing things around, but certain pieces of equipment that may malfunction and cause parts of their equipment to be pushed around. Movement or vibration, so can be quite significant depending on where your data center is. So say for instance it's in California near the San Andreas Fault, or somewhere in an area, New Zealand for example, which has a tendency to suffer earthquakes, then vibration and movement can actually be quite a significant deal. And obviously energy anomalies such as insufficient power, surging in powers, brownouts, so non-clean energy supplies, those sorts of things as well. And physical security involves protection against all those sorts of things. So the question Aaron's asked is, would old hardware failure be considered also a physical risk? It's got a bit of a foot in both camps. Poor maintenance on a RAID array, possibly. That's probably going to fall more in terms of general responsibility. It probably falls more under us as security or hardware people rather than under facilities maintenance. So from a strictly classifying it on that basis, job role description, it probably fits in the other camp more than physical security. The thing we need to know about physical security or accept about it is that responsibility is shared, even though it might not necessarily be strictly in our job description. It is shared. So general management would be potentially under the auspices of the facilities manager or facilities security team. So when we talk about facilities security, we're talking about those genuine security guard type people that you normally think of when people say security, not digital IT security professionals like ourselves. But nevertheless, we still have a responsibility for maintaining the environmental and access security. So for instance, if we're in a data center and we notice that it's getting too hot and there's no alarm bells going off, then we make sure that the right people know in order to be able to correct the issue. If we see a cabinet that's unlocked, that shouldn't be locked. No, that should be locked. Then we make sure that the right person knows. So we go and investigate, why is that cabinet unlocked when it shouldn't be? Is there someone who's just gone out for a coffee outside and they're working on the systems? It still should be locked while they're outside of the system. Things like that. Also responsible for who we get in terms of contractors, integrators, repair people, other partners, customers coming in and out of our facility. We can send to the security team, yes, we want this person to come in, but if we don't correctly vet them, that can then impact on the physical security of our systems as well. So it's our responsibility to assist facility security or facilities management in making sure that these sort of things are kept under control. And then the security management professionals perform risk assessments, which we're going to look at risk analysis a bit later on, and implementation reviews of their equipment, where they're stored, how they're stored, what sort of physical requirements they need, all those sorts of things, okay? So that we can provide information to the general management and the IT management professionals for them to be able to make informed decisions on what sort of facilities security they're going to put in place to help us protect our information assets. So physical access controls, there are lots of them. Lots and lots and lots. So physical location engineered with controls designed to minimize risk of attacks from physical threats. That's what we're talking about in describing a secure facility. So it's a physical location that is engineered with specific controls which are specifically designed to minimize or reduce the risk of attacks from physical threats. So that could be any number of physical threats or any number of those conditions or items we were talking about earlier. And we'll talk more about it as we go on. A secure facility can take advantage or should take advantage of the natural flow of terrain. So for example, it would be somewhat silly to put a data center at the bottom of a flood-prone valley, for example. Higher up the hill would be a better idea in that really basic, simple example. Traffic flow, so that's internal traffic flow, so people being able to get in and out of the facility, but also external traffic flow around the facility as well. Degree of urban development, So you may not want to put it into a highly populated area or an area where other risks around it may impact on it, such as landslides or other, other environmental or physical issues. And we can complement any sort of these protection mechanisms using our fences, our gates, walls, physical guards, dogs, alarms, all sorts of things which we're going to look at. All of them are what makes up our physical access controls. So Jace has asked, responsibilities line between facilities management and security management is sometimes blurred when it comes to physical security. How do you think this can be resolved? Very simply, through having specific, distinct discussions and drawing up policies on who does what, making sure that things are clearly defined, who has access to what, who has responsibility for each part of the pie. That's it. Communication. Communication is always the key with these things. So not only having a set of policies and procedures in place that determine who has responsibility over what, but making sure that those policies and procedures are published and drilled into people so everyone's clear. There are still times, I guess, where there's always going to be times where there are going to be crossovers and blurring of lines, or people who look at a policy and procedure and interpret it in a different way. That again comes down to that ability to write a clear, succinct policy and procedure, but also having potentially an intermediary or a person higher up the chain that's going to do the interpretation for you. Okay, but in the end of the day, it comes down to that documentation and making sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, and on that, Matt, we had a comment before. I think I've lost the name. Carl, he was saying in chat that shared responsibility would imply that different groups actually communicate and understand what correct state of doors and cabinets should be. His experience is that InfoSec is in another building management are a law unto themselves, and the IT support is local to the building. How would you ensure that that's a really difficult question. How do you ensure communication?
That happens in many organisations. You can't. It's impossible. It's like a manager saying after an incident, how can we make it so this never happens again? It's impossible to guarantee that anything is 100% ever. Unless you have a hierarchy, unless you're in the military or in some sort of organisation where the structure is so strict and the sanctions are so strict if you go against what policy and procedure is, that everyone's too afraid to step outside those boundaries, and they keep towing the line. And even then you're going to have incidences where these things don't work. At the end of the day, it's easy to sit here and say, we need clear lines of communication and we need these policies and procedures and documents, and they are the way that they need to be addressed. But at the end of the day, if they're poorly implemented, if they're not followed up, if there's not appropriate sanctions put in place, if management isn't sufficiently showing enough leadership to make sure that these things are put into place, then there are going to be potential problems, absolutely. So I don't think that's a question, that's one of those questions where you cannot give an answer which says, this, if you do this, you will guarantee this, you'll never have any issues. I just don't think it's possible to do that. But that's the case with everything in security. You can never guarantee, no matter what controls you have in place, you cannot 100% guarantee that it will provide 100% protection 100% of the time. So their guidelines, their policies, their procedures, you've just got to do the best you can and communicate them and try to make part of your security awareness program, part of people's job descriptions tied to the fact that, okay, these are the policies and procedures, you must follow these policies and procedures or there are appropriate sanctions. So whether that's, you get a couple of warnings and then you get the sack, or whether there's some fiscal penalty, or, there's got to be some sort of sanction to it if you don't toe the line. Otherwise, as Carl quite correctly says, no one cares and everyone goes off and does their own thing as they think is the best thing to do. So it's a difficult question, but I don't think there's a definitive answer other than to say follow these guidelines, keep the communication channels open, and hope that most of the time, and most people do, they follow those policies and procedures. So long as they're clearly defined, as unambiguous as possible, and they have those clear lines of responsibility. Excellent question, and probably one we could spend a whole short course on itself. So,
Yeah, yeah.
all
Cheers.
right. So on, as we say. So physical controls, lots of them. These are some. So walls, fences and gates, guards, dogs, ID cards, badges, locks and keys. So instead of just dwelling on that, let's have a look at each one of those as we go along a difference. So we've got man traps, which are an interesting thing. I've had some bad experiences with man traps. Electronic monitoring systems, alarm systems, obviously, computer rooms and wiring closets, the way they're designed, the way they're laid out, the way they're secured, and interior walls and doors to help keep areas partitioned and keep people's grubby mitts or eyes and ears out of specific areas that they shouldn't be in. So all of these are reasonably straightforward, or should be familiar to all of you. You just may not have thought about how to implement them. So ID cards and badges, okay, are a basic one. So this ties back into what we've been talking about in previous weeks about authentication and authorization. So again, this is about protecting confidentiality and integrity, but it's a physical mechanism for doing that. So we're tying physical security with information access control. So an ID card is typically concealed, name badge is typically visible, and it's just a very, very simple rudimentary form of biometric in that it's facial recognition, but instead of being done by a machine, it's done by security people. Should not be the only means of control because cards can be easily duplicated, they can be stolen, they can be modified. So not necessarily the photo IDs, but certainly proximity cards can be lost, duplicated, stolen, modified, whatever the case may be. So, and I've certainly worked in situations where that's occurred. So they're not the only form. You need other mechanisms as well, including your ID, security induction so that people know what their responsibilities are, but also more importantly, the security people know who they are and what they're coming in for. Those sorts of things. Tailgating is something that we need to keep an eye on as well. And again, that sort of comes back into that realm of social engineering, which we were talking about the other week. Okay, often when people tailgate in, sometimes security people will assume that, okay, well, they're with that person, so they're okay. So that can be an issue as well. We still need to make sure that if you're coming into a facility that every single person is verified as they go in. Now that's not necessarily our role because we are IT security people, we're not physical security people. However, if we see someone unusually within our facility, then it's our responsibility to report that or to investigate and find out a little bit more rather than just go, oh, well, okay, security's letting you in, they must be here for a specific purpose. They may not be. So locks and keys, I don't want to spend too much time on this. We know about locks and keys, okay? We can have mechanical, electromechanical locks. We can have manual locks, so open by hand. We can have programmable locks, okay? So they're programmed to open at a certain time, close at a certain time. We've got electronic locks. We've got biometric enabled locks, so need a retina scan or a thumbprint as we see in the movies. Locks fail, of course, at different times or can fail, and therefore alternative procedures for controlling access must be put in place. So generally that would fall back on some sort of physical access. Something really important to think about with the types of locks that you use is that locks it's possible to fail in two ways. So we can either fail safe, in other words, we fail closed. We fail open is fail safe, or fail secure means we fail, when it fails, it stays locked. Now, the reason that's important is got nothing to do with information assets. It's got more to do with human life. Okay, and being able to get out of a building. If for some reason you're in a data center and there's a big fire on, fire starts, and the locks all fail closed and you can't get out, you will die. Okay, simple as that. So one of the main aspects of that, and there are other aspects, and you could potentially talk about the dangers of information, being able to, like we see in the movies, let's create a diversion, all the electronic locks will fail and they'll open. And we've all seen movies like that where they drill through the bank vault and the electronic lock fails and all of a sudden they've got the golden panacea. But we've just got to take that into consideration, that human life is obviously the thing that we need to concentrate and protect above everything else. So Mantraps, I always break into a sweat when I talk about Mantraps. A small, sometimes really small enclosure that has an entry point and a different exit point. Okay, that's all it really is. It's a anteroom, if you like, a pass-through area. An individual will enter the Mantrap, request access via some method, whether it's via a speakerphone, a proximity card, cameras, whatever, doesn't matter. But then if they're verified and authorized, they're allowed to exit the Mantrap into the facility. If not, they get kicked out the back door, the same door they came in, or potentially they could be locked in there until some security officer comes along to escort them out of the building, which is this case here, down the bottom. So this is an example of some Mantraps. So this Mantrap on the left is the one that gives me nightmares. I was in a data center for a very large financial institution on the outskirts of Melbourne sometime many years ago, and they had a very similar Mantrap to this, very similar setup to this, except it was about, look, my memory says it was about 1/10 of the size. Obviously it wasn't. I'm quite skinny, but not that skinny. But it was small anyway, and it was a rather hot day, and this Mantrap was not air conditioned, and I went into the Mantrap. I was authorized to go through, and I got the tick off to get through, but then for some reason neither door would open, and I was stuck in that Mantrap for about 45 minutes, sweating my backside off until they let me out. So that was my first time I'd ever been through a Mantrap, so I wasn't particularly enamored with the experience, let's just say that. This one here is another example of a Mantrap, which is obviously significantly bigger for the purposes of taking in equipment or lots of people getting in at the same time. So other data centers that I'd worked in the past with when I was working my telco days was probably more on that model on the right rather than on the left. But there are a couple of examples of what Mantraps may look like. So electronic monitoring, basically what we're talking about there is just some sort of system that records events that occur. So whether that's recording use of swipe cards coming in and out, or whether it's video cameras, closed circuit TV actually recording vision of people coming in and out or operations, doesn't really matter, but it's some sort of electronic recording to record different events that occur. So times, dates, and what actually occurred. The drawback often to these sorts of systems is that they're generally reactive. It's quite expensive, obviously, in terms of manpower to have people available to look at these things in real time, although if your security posture demands it, then that could certainly happen. But often it doesn't. Often there's no one watching, and so they become reactive. So they're good for gathering evidence, but doesn't necessarily allow you to prevent an incident at the time. Alarms and alarm systems, again, it could be an alarm for someone breaking in, it could be detecting fire, some sort of environmental disturbance, in other words, vibration or earthquake, interruption in services due to loss of power, could be temperature, humidity, leaking of water, breakdown of essential services, so like any gas systems that you have or electrical systems. Alarms that can trip up into that. There could be alarms that trip up when people open cabinet doors. Something simple like that. So they open it up, alarm goes off, security somewhere gets notified, they check it, yes, such and such is coming into a change in this particular cabinet, that's okay. All right, so lots of different sensors that can be used to integrate with these alarm systems to detect motion, smoke, changes in thermal properties, breakage of glass, increase in weight or decrease in weight if someone pulls a server out and nicks off with it. Contact sensors, vibration sensors, all can feed into alarms and alarm systems, and there's other types of sensors that you may have come across as well. So certainly not exhaustive, but they're the more common ones. Data halls and wiring are especially useful to think about, and often something that is overlooked and isn't thought about too much is the way in which you've got things wired, so the way in which the cabinets are set up. the actual physical cabling is really important because it can lead to inadvertent loss of services or potentially deliberate loss of services, but it can also allow someone to come in as a valid, for a valid reason and plug something in that shouldn't be plugged in because of, you've got extra wiring points which are patched in, which may not need it, which shouldn't be patched in at the time. So the basic idea with any sort of wiring setup, no matter what scheme you use, and there's a number of different schemes, and certified cabling is not obviously a scope of this course, but we need to make sure that our cabling is appropriate for the application which we're using it for. So it would be no good, for instance, having old UTP-3 twisted pair if we're trying to serve a large-scale database server to thousands of customers. They would need a much higher degree of cabling. So whether that's category 6, category 7, fiber directly into the back of the servers, whatever the case may be. Okay, but cabling needs to be, and wiring really needs to be thought about carefully, not only for a capacity point of view, so from the availability point of view, how can we protect the availability of our assets, but also from the integrity point of view and confidentiality point of view as well, so to prevent people from plugging devices in where they shouldn't be plugged into. We know that it's quite obvious, or should be, that logical controls, no matter what logical digital controls you've got in place, can be defeated if physical access to the equipment is actually available. So if you've got access, if you can get access into a data hall, and by getting access to that data hall, all the cabinets are unlocked and you can go freely from one to the other, then that's obviously a security risk that needs to be addressed. The thing to be wary of also as well, another point, is that custodial staff, so the people that run the data center or people that run the systems, are often the least scrutinized. So they have the most access and they're least put under the microscope. They're given the greatest degree of unsupervised access. And we know from our previous weeks that the majority of intrusions, majority of attacks occur inside a network by people who have got the highest level of trust. So we need to think about that as well, who we give physical access to and how they are supervised, whether they're recorded by video cameras or have someone, a security member, with them all the time. Up to you, depends on your risk analysis. Interior walls and doors, I won't spend too much time on this, but basically the idea of these is to, a couple of different things, to provide screening from prying eyes, to provide some sort of fire protection, potentially. So fire protection and physical security. So actual physical access. Even coming down to having one-way windows in some offices so that people inside can see out but not the other way in, okay? So pretty basic sort of stuff. Fire security and safety. Okay, the most serious threat to safety of people in an organization, generally in a data center, is a possibility of fire, generally, more cases than not. It accounts for more property damage, personal injury and death than any other threat. Unfortunately, I haven't got a source for that, but I might look that up. I can't give you a definitive source off the top of my head, but that's you can take that as being real. Imperative that physical security plans examine and implement strong measures to detect and respond to fires. I would think that's pretty obvious, not only from the point of view that we need to protect our data and our information assets, but also from that the gold standard, which of course is protecting human life. So the protection of the lives of the people that work for us or are associated with coming in and out, whether that's contractors or customers or whoever it is. We have a duty of care to protect them. So there's fire suppression systems, which allow us to monitor and alert, but they also suppress fire through some form of retardant or extinguishing agent. Now, there's lots of them. Some of them are still in use now, which I think I mentioned on the next slide, which probably aren't legal anymore in terms of don't fit legislation, but there are still some of them around. And there's lots of different fire suppression companies, fire suppression systems that can be implemented or consulted in order to be able to get appropriate fire detection and suppression up for your particular data center or application. Fire detection systems may be manual or automatic. Automatic are obviously preferred. because they operate 24/7 and monitor and alert in real time. Part of a complete fire safety program, I think it's really important to note, it's not just all about the tin or the hardware or the electronics. It's also about individuals that monitor what happens during the chaos of a fire evacuation, to not only make sure that people get out safely, but to ensure that no one's going back in. And I know this is stuff of movies, but I've actually been involved in an incident where a fire was deliberately set as a diversion, and someone got into a data center in an attempt to steal some information. They weren't successful, but that's what they attempted to do. So it can happen. So we need individuals to be able to monitor that as it happens. If we leave it up to monitoring systems, then it becomes that reactive process later on down the track. But again, it's going to depend on your risk analysis and associated costs. 3 basic types of fire detection systems, which you may or may not argue for or against. So detect changes in temperature, basically. When it becomes too extreme, then obviously they assume there's a fire. Smoke detection, where there's smoke, there's fire, usually. Unless you've got electronic equipment which can, smoke, and then they run out of smoke because something's no good anymore, burst a capacitor or something. Clearly, hopefully that's not going to trip off your fire detection system. And obviously flame detection, if you get to the point where you're detecting flames, there's something seriously going on. Fire suppression can be portable, so we can have, our fire extinguishers. They can be manual, so again, portable hoses or fire extinguishers, or they can be an automatic dispersal system. Number of different classes of fire extinguishers, which we don't need to go into any detail for. It's not a fire prevention class. Installed systems apply suppressive agents, usually either sprinkler or gaseous systems. So gas emission systems are probably most common and most useful. Water can tend to do damage in electronic environments, funnily enough. So from that point of view, gas emission systems are probably more useful, more widely deployed. And again, that's only anecdotal. I don't have a source for that. I'm not a professional in this particular area, so I couldn't tell you whether that is the case or not. But in terms of my own personal experience, gaseous emission systems have certainly been more prevalent. So until recently, 2 types of systems, CO2 and halon. Halon now been classified as ozone depleting, so it's not used. CO2, obviously bad for humans. If there's too much. Alternative clean agents include those ones, FM200, Energen, and trifluoromethane, some of which are more popular than others. And there are other agents out there as well, which I'm sure you've probably come across. So heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Remember, HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. The whole idea about that is just to control environmentals. So temperature, filtration of particles out of the air, humidity, static electricity. That's what we're talking about with HVAC. Very important. Can be very complex systems with a range of different monitoring systems attached to them to make sure that everything's just right in terms of temperature, humidity, filtration of particles out of the air, because all of that can have a big impact on your digital assets. Just a quick one on ventilation shaft. This is more of a, ventilation shafts are obviously common and useful in any sort of building environment, but they can, if you're into things like the Mission Impossible movies, can lead to people gaining access in, but I think more likely and more appropriately we talk about is rodent infestation. So allowing rats and mice and other creepy crawlies to get into places where maybe they shouldn't be. So we talk about installing mesh guards at various points to compartmentalize the runs in those particular ventilation shafts so that rodents can't infest our particular area. Power management, obviously a really important one. So we talk about the electrical quantity, so the voltage and amperage levels. But we also need to worry about the quality or how clean that particular power supply is and make sure that it's properly installed. So not something that your Uncle Dan put in, but something that certified electricians obviously have put in. Any noise that interferes with that normal 50 hertz cycle, and we're talking about Australian power here, obviously. In other areas of the world, your power will be different. But so this particular statement is more about Australian power. Noise that interferes with a normal 50 hertz cycle can result in inaccurate time clocks or unreliable internal clocks inside your CPU. So even just, disruptions to the frequency of the power can cause issues as well. Grounding ensures that return flow of current is properly discharged to ground. So if it's not, we don't want things blowing up. So if there's any return flow of current that's abnormal, it needs to be discharged to the ground. Overloading any circuits causes problems with circuit tripping and can overload electric cable, increasing the risk of fire. So again, another argument for making sure that it's applied correctly, but that it's also the power system that you deploy is scaled correctly for your environment in terms of capacity, both now and into the future, and how that power is actually delivered. So what amperage, what voltage, what sort of captive plugs are actually installed, all that needs to be considered. Do we need 10 amp or 15 amp circuits or more? What do we need? UPS, again, is related to that. So UPS is just basically a big vault full of batteries in most data centers that is just fed from the mains. Mains power goes through, it keeps it charged. If the mains power goes off, the UPS or this big battery takes over and provides power for a set amount of time. Depending on how big your UPS is, depending on the type of UPS, you might be able to power for a very long time, or it may only be a short period of time during which you're also going to go out and fire up your backup generators, which could be diesel or petrol driven, and then they will take over the power load while the main power supply is down. Now in Australia, we do have pretty good power supply, so expensive, but pretty good. So in general, if we have a power outage, UPS or generators are not necessarily going to be used for a long time. Having said that, where I'm currently living, one of the local data centers, if you like, power was lost to it for a period of 3 weeks. God knows why, we never found out, but power was off for 3 weeks, and so obviously generators were going for that length of time, so that was quite costly to the organisation. Not sure how power can be out for 3 weeks, but anyway, that's what it was. So emergency shut off, just an important aspect of power management. Shut off power immediately in the case of a medical or emergency related to humans. Okay, so we need to be able to sometimes shut off the power. In Australia, it is generally easily accessible in large data halls. So it might be a bit of a trek to it, might be down the other end of the data hall, but there is generally a large red button somewhere which allows you to shut all power to the data center immediately. Generally has fairly serious repercussions. So if you ever are going to hit it, don't hit it accidentally, like an old boss of mine did, wheeling in a trolley full of equipment, and he accidentally bumped into the emergency shut off for the data hall. So that was a good start to his day.
No, what a disaster.
Yes, he was actually a field tech for Honeywell at the time, and he got called out to one of the Telstra data centres in Melbourne and shut one of the floors off.
Oh, wow.
By bringing a trolley full of Honeywell equipment in that he was supposed to be replacing, and wasn't real. I mean, it was his fault. He's a bit careless, but the power shut off button wasn't adequately protected, and it wasn't in a great spot. So yeah, but yeah, he didn't have a great day that day.
Clearly.
All right, so water problems, lack of water is generally a problem if it's to do with fire suppression systems. If you happen to have a water one, which again, I've said earlier, isn't always the best idea in a data center, but more importantly, water chillers, providing your air conditioning and to help regulate the humidity. So there may be some data centers or circumstances where a lack of water is actually an issue, which often is not thought about. Certainly a surplus of water or elevated water pressure can pose a huge threat with respect to flooding or leaking in your data center. That's an obvious one. So it's important to integrate water detection systems into alarm systems as well to ensure that if there's any extra moisture under your false floors or in your ceilings or anywhere else that it shouldn't be, then that's detected very quickly so you can jump on it, because it can be obviously a real threat. Structural collapse, look, probably less of an issue unless you live in the Shaky Isles, so it's New Zealand for those who don't know, or somewhere along the San Andreas Fault, or somewhere in an earthquake-prone, volcano-prone area. But it is, I mean, it is possible. It's something that needs to be considered. So one of the things I think is more important, and I can give an example of this too, unfortunately, is thinking about the load ratings of the flooring that you're putting your equipment on. So again, quite a few years ago now, there was a data center for a fairly large national carrier. Well, it's not the biggest, but certainly not the smallest. And they had a data center in Carlton that they just kept jamming more stuff into their cabinets, more and more, without really thinking about the loading of the floor, and the false floor collapsed. And, you know, they ended up with cabinets crashing, you know, a couple of feet down onto the concrete floor, which ended up in some cut cabling and cut power wires and damage and all sorts of things. So that's something to think about in terms of structural collapse. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole building's going to collapse, but that the supporting services, the supporting flooring or other infrastructure, even cable trays, you know, if they're overloaded, can collapse as well. So think about that as well. That's something that we need to think about. And again, not necessarily our job, is it? Facilities maintenance and management need to look up this. Architects need to look at this sort of stuff up. But if later on down the track, as with this data center I was talking about, the architects had initially done their job. Okay, everyone had done their job and it was fine for what they saw for the foreseeable future. But then they started to put more and more and more on it. So instead of, and then, you know, someone after the floor had collapsed said, yeah, well, you know, I'd started to notice a bit of a bow on the floor a few weeks ago. Okay, if you see that, then say something. You know, that's where our responsibility as professionals comes in, not to just let that happen, but to make a note of it and say to someone in charge, hey, it's a bit of a bow on the floor there. I reckon we need to have a look at it. Whether they do or not, maybe not, who knows? But it's something that at least you can be partly responsible for. So it belongs to all of us. Maintenance of facility systems. So we need to make sure that we're aware that physical security must be constantly documented, evaluated, and tested like everything else. And again, this falls more into our DRBCP, which we'll have a look at shortly. So I might keep moving there. Inventory management, again, part of physical security. You need to know what you've got, document what you have, asset sticker, everything, making sure that you keep a list of everything you got. If you don't have that baseline, how do you know if something's gone missing? I mean, you might, because it might be an essential service that suddenly no longer works because someone's stolen your server. But in general, we need to keep an itemized inventory of what's in our data center, where it's stored or where it's plugged into. So we always know and always aware of what's coming in and out of our organization. So that's it for the physical side of things. So now we look at risk analysis. Are there any specific questions that we can answer on physical? Let's have a look. So should custodial staff also be monitored closely for security breaches? Yes, they would need to be under the same monitoring and same security policies and procedures as anyone else. So I don't see them as being above that. How often should they execute the disaster recovery plan? We'll look at that shortly. Face recognition system now being used in China in conjunction with a vast array of public cameras. Does it seem like reliable right now? I don't know. I don't know whether it's reliable. You can only go on what the Chinese tell you, and we don't know how reliable. I don't know. Without actually having first-hand experience with it, I couldn't give you a definitive answer on that. It seems somewhat Big Brother-ish, but that's a debate, obviously, for a different time.
That long one, Matt, boils down to what's the best way to produce change when people either don't have time or feel like they don't have time or don't care.
To produce change, so change in what?
In terms, I guess, how do you get people to care about physical security?
Well, again, it's communication and education is probably the best path to take on that. You can't make anyone care about anything if they really don't want to care about it, but you need to try and tie it. I mean, first of all, make them aware, education, communication, but then, you know, tie it to their own responsibilities so that, you know, if they don't uphold their end of the bargain, then there's going to be some sort of sanction or something that they're going to have to deal with as an issue. At the end of the day, if people are not going to care and they're not going to follow the bouncing ball or the policies and procedure of the organisation, then they need to be warned appropriately and dismissed appropriately as per current HR legislation. But it all comes, at the end of the day, it all comes down to that communication. If people don't want to buy into it, there's not really a lot that you can do to force them in this day and age. So Earl said physical security is becoming less of a concern given the popularity of data centers and infrastructure as a service. No, I disagree, Earl. All it does is it shifts that responsibility from you. So physical security might not be an issue for you, but it's still an issue for your equipment somewhere, somehow. Whoever's looking after that equipment has to be able to provide that physical security on your behalf. So I agree that it's not a concern necessarily for you because you're shifting it to be someone else's responsibility and you're paying them for it. But nevertheless, it is still important as it ever was. Security order that stole things. Classy. Yes, classy. Well, don't assume that if you've got a master's, people will listen to you. Yeah, they might. Hopefully they do, but certainly don't make that assumption.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a bad way to start, to at least have a layer of expertise that you can fall back on and say, well, look, I'm an expert in this area, but yeah, certainly don't assume that anyone will listen to anyone. But it's a good point. So temperature, Google 80 Fahrenheit, doing has been much slower. Yeah. Look, some data centers in the past I've worked in were almost like working in a refrigerator. So long as they're cold enough or warm enough to fit within the operating guidelines of the hardware that's stored within that data center, it can be whatever people want it to be. It's no real big deal. People who would care, employees that would care, would think, oh, well, we'll keep it at a temperature that is at least comfortable for our employees to work in if they're in there a lot of the time. So for instance, some data centers are, if you're in there at 4 o'clock in the morning and it's middle of winter and the data center is set at 18 degrees, then a long period of time in that temperature can be really annoying. But it's up to the individuals to decide that based on the equipment. As I said, as long as the equipment within it has an appropriate temperature for that, then that's all good. All right, so I'll just push on. So risk analysis. Risk analysis is a bit of a life cycle, a bit of a process. The point about that, and basically it boils down to these points on this slide. So we need to be able to identify what our assets are, specifically what our assets are. So not just say servers or data center. What are the specific assets we're trying to protect? Is it customer information? Is it financial information? What is it? So we look at it very granularly. We then need to identify the threats. So what are the threats to that particular asset? So if we say, all right, we've got a database system, a SQL database system, that's the asset we're trying to protect in this particular case. What are the threats to that? All right, so we look at the threats to the underlying operating system, we look at the physical threats, we look at the threats to the actual application and the data lying on top. And then we think about, okay, that's the threats. What is the likelihood of each of those threats occurring? So what are the chances they're having with the mechanisms and the controls we have in place? What is the likelihood of those threats occurring? So that's the second step. The third step is then to say, let's do an impact analysis. So that is, if those threats were to occur, what impact would it have on our business? So would it put us out of business? Would it be a little bit of a blip on the radar? Would nobody care? Would it result in information being stolen and thus lead to litigation or loss of customers or so on and so forth? You get the idea. Okay, so what impact does each of those threats have if it was to occur? So once you understand that, you understand how important, you get a ranking, you can come up with a ranking of each of those threats to each of those assets. So all right, well, threat 1, that's really high likelihood, and if it occurred, it would be a really high impact. So that becomes priority number 1. The next threat might be, well, it's really likely to occur, but if it did occur, Probably no one would care. It wouldn't really have any impact. All right, so that's lower down the list. That's why we do our risk analysis. It really is as simple as that. Then based on that priority, we plan our mitigation mechanisms. So what are we going to do? What are we going to implement to prevent that threat from causing that impact? Okay, now obviously the higher the impact, the greater the loss within the organization, the more money you will be able to justify spending on your mitigation mechanism for that particular impact, that particular threat, hopefully. Doesn't always work like that, unfortunately, but hopefully that's the way it'll go. And remember that all of this is a life cycle approach, so it changes constantly. The assets that you have today may not be the assets that you have in 6 months' time, or 12 months' time, or even in a week's time. Okay, there may be very specific things that you're protecting, or particular parts of your business you're protecting now, and in the future they can change. But also, even if the assets don't change, then the threats can change. And if the threats don't change, the likelihood of those threats occurring can change, or perhaps both can change, both the threats and the likelihood of them are changing. And then if we look at the impact analysis, then what would be the impact of incident 1 or incident A happening today in 3 weeks' time, or 6 weeks' time, or 6 months' time may be totally different. So it might be bigger, it might be smaller, depending on how your systems and your network architecture changes. Because businesses grow, they shrink, people come in, people go out, information comes in, they change direction, they add services. So it changes all the time. We need to be agile enough to keep our risk analysis up to date to ensure that our mitigation mechanisms keep in time with the ebb and flow of our business or our organization. So this is a couple examples of risk matrix, so what I was talking about then. So if, for example, we look at, and this is just, these aren't particular risks here, it's more over here, that risk is over here, but this particular risk table is just explaining what it's all about. So if we have an insignificant consequence, but it's a certainty to occur, then we're still going to rate it as a high risk. Not an extreme, but a high risk. If, for example, we have a catastrophic outcome, catastrophic consequence of something occurring. So in other words, our project's abandoned or we go out of business, and it's moderate chance to occur, so 10 to 50% chance, then we rate that as an extreme risk. So that would be higher on our priority list and probably open to having more money spent on it than something that was low. If you look at the other end of the scale, if we've got insignificant consequence, so nothing's really going to happen, no one's really going to care, and the chances of that risk occurring are less than 3%, so they're rare, then we'll just say, well, you know what, that's a low risk, we're not really going to worry about doing too much. Whereas over here on this particular threat matrix over on the right, we're looking at particular threats and vulnerabilities. So for example, if we have a look at this insecure wireless system, if we've got that vulnerability and a threat is an insider attack, we rate that as a 3 out of 10. Okay, fair enough. We rate our physical security as a 9 out of 10 for insider attacks, so on and so forth. We add all these different vulnerabilities and threat ratings up, and we get an overall risk profile or risk score for that particular attack. So in this case, we're saying intrusion, hacking, and password attacks are 42 out of 60, because each one of these columns is worth 10. So 42 out of 60, whereas theft of hardware is only a 16 out of 60. So in that case, it's just we would put more effort or money into our intrusion prevention than we would in our theft of hardware. That's a basic threat matrix. But you can see, that's one way of doing a threat matrix. Okay, you don't have to do it that way. There's more than one way to do it. Just an example. So risk management concepts, how do we manage our risk once we've determined what the risk is and what mitigation technique we're going to, before we decide what mitigation technique we can do, what are the approaches we can take? So we can mitigate against the risk, so we can try to prevent it from happening. We can accept the risk and say, all right, well, it's only really low risk, so we're not going to worry about it. We can transfer the risk. Okay, so send it to someone else. How do we do that? Any ideas on how we do that? Transfer risk. There's one particular way we do that. So we could either potentially send it via insurance, so insure, or we could outsource.
That's
Okay,
what we
so
got. That's what we got in the chat.
yeah, so we can, oh, okay. I wonder why I
Go,
wasn't, of course I'm
go,
not looking at the chat. I wonder why I wasn't getting it.
They were going nuts.
There we go. So very good, everyone. Yeah, so insurance or outsourcing are the two typical ways that we'd look at that. Avoid the risk. Not probably the best way to do it. Oh, sorry, no, that's not avoid, that's ignore. Ignore is not the best way to do it. Ignore is a horrible way to do it. So avoid the risk. Avoiding the risk would basically mean we don't put into place any systems. So say, for instance, we have a vulnerability to a web application that we're writing. Okay, a good way to avoid that risk is to simply remove that particular feature from the system, or do it in a different way, program in a different way, or work in a different way, install it in a different way, so that the risk is avoided overall. Or if we know, for example, that a certain operating system or a certain application system has a specific set of vulnerabilities which are going to be relevant for our particular network, then we might say, all right, well, we're going to avoid installing that sort of system. We'll get in another vendor's system which doesn't have that sort of vulnerabilities. So that's an example of what you might look at there. Not necessarily the only one, but an example. Deter is simply to put up lots of obvious sort of mechanisms that would hopefully deter people from coming in and doing the nefarious deeds that they would like to do. And then lastly, ignoring the risk. It is, I guess, a valid concept if you want to take it that way, but not a particularly clever one. To ignore the risk and hope that it goes away. But it's there. So we now get to our policy making process. Okay, so out of our risk management process, we come out with a number of mitigation techniques and how we're going to put those into use. But another part of risk mitigation, so a valid part of risk mitigation, aside from firewalls and IDS and all the other lovely technical controls that we all love playing with, we also have our policy making, our policies. So basically they're just detailed action plans for how we want our customers, integrators, partners, users, or whatever to use our IT systems. How we prevent security incidents from happening, and if they do, through the use of policies and procedures rather than technical controls, and how we respond to or clean up if for some reason our technical controls don't work, or one of those, rare events occurs and we have to clean up after a security incident. So some of the examples of policies that we could put in place include an incident handling policy, which would inform the formation of an incident handling team. Okay, so specific members, specific people to handle incidents as they occur, and how we're going to handle them from our organizational perspective. Things like acceptable email usage policy or password policies or system policies, or how we use any of our applications are again policies that can prevent these sorts of, that can mitigate against certain things from happening. BCP and DR policies, obviously important, and we'll talk about those in more detail shortly. And of course, remembering that the main objectives of a security policy, or everything we do, are to ensure the C, the I, and the A. So the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability, as we've been tying in over the last 3 weeks. So policies should encourage clear communication, should be written in concise and clear language, unambiguous as possible, should have a defined scope and applicability. Okay, so making big, general, all-encompassing policies, generally not the way to go. Try and make them as specific as possible. They need to be enforceable by some sort of sanction or a guideline, a HR policy, or relevant state or federal legislation. Clearly articulates and recognises the areas of responsibilities for individuals and teams. Articulate clearly with other policies to provide referent guidance. So in other words, if you've got a general system policy and then you have an acceptable email usage policy, you can refer from one to the other to provide that referent guidance. And most importantly, have management support. If they don't have the support of your management, they're not worth the paper, the metaphysical paper that they're printed on. And this gets back to some of the questions we were talking about earlier. How do we do this? How do we make sure this happens? This is the best way to do it, or one of the best ways to do it. Still not going to guarantee anything. Nothing is 100% certain in security. Nothing is 100% certain ever, other than death and taxes. But security, good set of security, well-written security policies will provide you with a really good security blanket and a really good framework to ensure that the risks that you've trying to mitigate against are successfully protected against as best as you can. Benefits, these are just a few of the benefits of an effective security policy. Just remember that word, effective security policy. So it'll protect your IT and IP, so your information technology and intellectual property assets. It will provide support for you as IT staff when you're in a security incident. So it'll tell you what to do, how to do it in a broad framework approach. It will enable you to enforce acceptable usage standards and be backed up by appropriate sanctions. It allows you to provide evidence for investigations if a legal investigation or even if it's an internal investigation is required. And again, that ties into forensics. So ability to enforce sanctions, fines where applicable, yep. And justification of IT security expenditure. So if you've got a specific policy which mandates this system must do X, Y, Z, and it can't, then you can point to the policy and say, well, you know what? We need to spend some money on this system to ensure that it meets our security policy. So it gives you that justification as a security person. And then security awareness, we've sort of already spoken about in previous weeks, but this ties in with security policies as well. So it's all good to have these policies, but they need to be tied into your security awareness program so that people are aware of them, and you know people are aware of them. They have to sign documents to say, yes, we're aware of these policies, we'll abide by them. Okay, if you don't provide that security awareness training, then people can legitimately put up their hands and say, well, you know what? I didn't know about it. And these again, some of the benefits of security awareness, which we've spoken about in previous weeks. So reduce security risks because we're educating our users, our customers, our people. They should be really easily implemented, so not make it complex, keep it nice and simple. Regulation of security through standardization. So we have standards, policies, procedures, which everyone's got to follow. Everyone has to follow the same bouncing ball, makes it easy. And hopefully improves user management, tracking, reporting, and response to specific incidents or issues as they occur. So DR and BCP into the final section. I know we're probably going a little bit over and apologise for that. My tutorials often do. So apologies for that, but let's get into the last section. So DR and BCP. So what is it? It is, quite simply, disaster recovery and business continuity planning. They are the same thing in principle and often interchangeable terms, although they're not specifically the same. Generally overlooked in small organisations simply because there's the perceived cost effect. But they can be of huge benefit even to the smallest of organisations and can actually save them money if they run into specific issues or outages. And big businesses, of course, can spend literally millions of dollars each year on DR and BCP. So if we think about, if we think about what they are in more detail between the differences between the two. So DR or disaster recovery is the continuation of critical business processes when a disaster destroys data processing capabilities. So in other words, when you're in trouble, you need to be able to continue your critical business processes. That's a disaster recovery. Business continuity planning is planning the preparation of the 7 Ps, prior preparation and planning prevents pretty poor performance. So it is the preparation, the testing and maintenance of specific actions, policies and procedures to get yourself back to normal processing status in the event of disaster. So disaster is, okay, we've had a major disaster. How do we keep everything going, all our critical stuff going now? That's the DR. The BCP is, okay, how do we get back to where we were before the disaster occurred? So different, similar. Two sides of the same coin. So business impact, or the risk analysis that we have to do for our BCP and DR, if it harms critical business processes significantly, it's a disaster. Okay, that's what we're going to use as definition. It's a time-based definition in that how long can the business stand the pain before we go belly up? If it's a long time, okay, we've got a bit more time up our sleeve, we can take things a bit easier and relax. If it's only a short time, if we're losing millions of dollars a day, which can occur in some businesses, then we really need to get up to speed and get things, have a really well documented, well tested BCP to get things up again. And then again, there's that probability of occurrence. So how likely is the particular disaster we're talking about going to occur? So in other words, we might say a disaster is an earthquake. Right? So how likely is it that to occur in the middle of Melbourne? Probably next to no chance. So in that case, we're not really going to worry about it too much. If, however, we said earthquake and we've got a data center right on the San Andreas fault, then we'd say a likelihood is pretty high. We've got to put, you know, some sort of plan together to mitigate, to continue our business and get it back to number one, status one, as soon as possible. So again, it's, you know, that what we do with our DRBCP is going to be determined by our risk analysis and the associated business impact. So objectives of DRBCP are still, why does my slide keep doing that? Still, and I know I've got them in, they're in a different order here, so hopefully don't confuse you, but availability is the main focus. Availability, because remember, we've got to keep our business critical functions going, and then we have to get ourselves back to where we were before the disaster occurred. So availability is number one. Confidentiality and integrity are still important, as they always are. But in terms of the CIA triad, availability is the main objective. So we need to build a plan. It's going all over the place. Build a plan. So create, what's going on here? Sorry about that, guys. Build a plan. So create, document, test, and update a business continuity plan, or a DR plan, that will allow timely recovery of our critical business operations, is going to minimize loss in terms of revenue, intangible assets, but mainly loss in terms of C, I, and A. And of course, has to meet legal and regulatory requirements. So whatever legal and regulatory requirements you have in your particular industry, you're going to have to document and build your plan around those particular requirements. So the scope of works includes, in other words, what do we include in our DRBCP? We include our data centers, if we have them. We include our distributed operations, wherever they are, our WAN sites, our satellite sites, our remote teleworkers. We include personnel, networks, power, environmentals, everything. All aspects of the IT environment that are required to keep our critical business processes going in the event of a disaster must be considered within the DRBCP plan. And of course, it's a life cycle approach, as we've said, with everything. Okay, it's an ongoing process, not a project with a defined, well, it has got a defined beginning often, but it doesn't have a definite end. Okay, we just keep going. As our system changes, as our services change, as our customer base changes, as our organization grows, we have to change our DR and our BCP plan. We have to keep going. We create, we test, we maintain, and we update. Critical business functions evolve, they change, so we need to update those as well. The BCP team has to include both business and IT personnel. So it's not just us IT boffins running the show. We have to have business people involved as well to ensure that critical business functions are being met. What they do on the ground in terms of critical business functions, we have very little knowledge over realistically from an application point of view. We understand what the back-end systems are to service those, but we don't necessarily know exactly what they do day to day. So we need the business people involved on the ground to tell us whether we're hitting our targets in terms of maintaining our critical business functions in the event of a disaster. And that's why we need lots of different stakeholders involved. And then lastly, we've got to have the support of senior management. Okay, we have to have the support of senior management. Just one other thing that I want to mention about DRBCP, because this is effectively the last slide, is that it's part of that life cycle approach is the testing. really important that you test a DR and BCP plan. When I used to work, I've worked for numerous banks in my working life, and we would generally do, at some banks we used to do a DR BCP test every month. And that basically involved taking down a major system in the middle of the night when it was least customer impacting, and we would all stay up all night testing our policies and procedures and processes to make sure they worked. Sometimes it might be 3 months. Other organisations are working with 3 months, others were 6 months, others were 12 months, others never did it at all. Because they had a DR BCP plan, but they never tested it. So how on earth can you know it's going to work? You can't. You can only guess. And guesswork is not good enough when you're trying to get your business critical services back up and running when a disaster occurs. You can't just guess that something's going to work. You've got to have tested it first. So that's a really important part of it, which it's a lot of work. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of moving parts, but it has to be done regularly. And that, my friends, brings us to the last slide.
Wonderful. And thank you. But we're just having an amazing amount of chat action about BCPs. A lot of talk about whether IT and the business should have separate BCP teams. There's been some robust debate going on. Do you think that one team is enough, or do you think that different sections of different businesses should have teams?
I can only talk about my experience with that. In my experience, because I've worked in different areas where there's been one for business and one for technology, and then other times when there's been a single team. In my experience, the single team has worked probably better. The important thing, as I've banged on about quite a bit tonight, is the communication and that interaction. You could have 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. So long as they all follow the same policies and procedures and they all intermesh nicely together and they communicate well, there's no reason why multiple teams can't work. But of course, the more moving parts you have in any system, the more chances there are going to be issues and, complications occur. But look, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the individual enterprise and what works best for the culture of that particular enterprise.
Which is probably the answer you're going to give to the next question about, in the event of multiple teams, how do you choose which one leads, or would you have a flat structure between teams?
Well, that's an interesting one. Often, in all cases where I've been involved with DR-BCP teams, the technical team, certainly during testing, has taken the lead. In terms of real incidents, the technical team will take the lead because ultimately it's their responsibility to get those critical services up and running again. But they have to work very closely with the business team to ensure that, as I said before, to ensure that they are delivering the critical services that are actually necessary. So what we see as IT people go, okay, well, that server's back on, everything should be right. And you go back down to the business team and they say, well, it's great, I can access a server, but I can't get any of the data, or it's all corrupted, or whatever the case may be. So there needs to be that communication. But ultimately, when we're talking about technical implementation of emergency processes to get services back up and running again, the technical team, by and large, are going to take the lead. Does that make sense? Did that answer what you're asking?
Yeah, totally. No, there's just a lot of discussion and active disagreement, which is super interesting. Might be a really interesting one to take to the forums, gang, and maybe do some long form responses and talk about your differences of opinions. It could be really
absolutely.
intriguing.
And see, this is a great thing about security, or indeed, networking, or any of these sort of IT subjects, is that there's so much scope. And that makes it really, scary, but it also makes it incredibly interesting as well, in that, what's right for one organization is not going to be right for another organization. And that can be totally unrelated to the technical mitigation mechanisms you've got in place, or your data, or even your business model. It can come down to something as simple as a culture within your organization or differences in personalities. It's fascinating. It can be really, really fascinating stuff, because remember, we're not talking about implementing a routing protocol or implementing a firewall system. We're talking about coming up with policies and procedures to get systems back up and running. So there's always going to be a huge debate on what is the best way to do that. So it will generate lots of discussion.
Yeah, it has. All right. So do you want to run through next week, and then we'll get to some questions?
Yeah, sure.
And then after that, gang, I'll chat about the exam briefly again.
All right. So basically, well, that's it for our 4-week course. So next week, well, it's not really next week. It's actually this Friday. So in a couple of days' time, 30th of March, Guy's going to open up the exam for you to use. So as he said earlier, about 12 days, but I'll let him talk about that. And as Guy said at the top of the show, really important that you provide us with your feedback on all aspects of this particular online course. So content, whether you've liked what I've said or haven't liked what I've said, administration, the running, all aspects of that, because we want to try and improve these online courses as much as we can. And lastly, thank you sincerely for turning up every week and listening and watching. I know these, as I said before, my tutorials can sometimes go off on different tangents and can be a little bit long at times, but hopefully you'll see the benefit, and obviously you have if you've come back each week. So thank you sincerely from me personally, but all the team for coming in each week and listening.
Beauty. Thank you, Matt. Running long is, as far as I'm concerned, a sign of someone who's generous with their time. So I really appreciate that. From the perspective of coming up with good short courses. Let's go to some questions, eh?
Okay, so I just might go to top to bottom. So How often should an organisation execute their DR plan? That's going to depend, a bit like I said before, probably already answered that partly, but going to depend on the organisation and how often they can run it. Sometimes, say for instance, an example would be one of the financial services places I worked in years ago was one of the first in Australia to implement an internet banking system, which was available 24/7. Now, initially when we first put that system in, we tested our DR-BCP plan for that particular system every 3 months. But then we found as more and more customers got online and it became more heavily used, you would be absolutely amazed at how many people do their internet banking in the middle of the night. Shift workers, clearly. And we found that we couldn't do it every 3 months because it was just too much of a hassle. There was too much impact to our customers. So then we had to bump that out a bit. So sometimes that's got to be taken into consideration, but you need to consider how important the system is to your overall business function. If it's really, really critical and the impact of the threats that you've identified are quite high, then, test it reasonably regularly. I would say at least biannually. The other time you need to test it regularly or test it again is if it changes. Obviously, every time your DR or BCP changes for whatever reason, whether it's a new system's come on board, you've changed the services that you're offering, or you've changed your customer base, or something may have changed, then you need to update it and then test it again once it's updated. So I hope that answers that particular question in association with what I said earlier. I'm not sure this question's been answered, but how highly regarded is OSCP cert? I can't answer that question. I'm not actually familiar with what that is off the top of my head. So I might be having a mental block now. If you want to just elaborate on what you're saying there, I might be able to answer.
Yeah, or chuck it in the forum if we can't.
Yep. How do you infer security such as antivirus tools when business applications do not work with those, especially during a scan runtime? Which actually impacts actual business flow. Again, you've got to come up with technical solutions that provide the services that you want. So you may not be able to use certain antivirus tools if they don't work with bespoke business applications. You may have to find other methods for providing clean traffic to those particular systems or other mechanisms, perhaps on other systems that will do that scanning for you. It can be difficult at times, particularly in environments where you have lots of customized applications, customized business technologies. It's all right to say, well, we've got to have antivirus on every machine. I've certainly worked in circumstances where we couldn't have antivirus or intrusion detection systems installed on particular machines because if you did, the system would not actually provide the services that it was designed to do, which then of course impacts on your availability. Okay, so sometimes security can impact on your availability rather than enhancing it. So it's a balancing act, but you just have to find some additional way to do it if at all possible. There generally is another way around it. It will just depend on what other systems you've got living around it. Okay, people equating risk with likelihood and people not understanding black swans. Okay, I don't get the black swan reference, but equating risk with likelihood. Yep, it is an issue. So the risk is, something that can happen. The likelihood is, what are the chances of it happening? It's actually relatively simple, but of course, I guess in layman's terms, the two words are often would often be used interchangeably, which creates that confusion. Would you use a committee meeting group of some description and convene every so often to assess new device cover in your environment and to as vulnerable? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In many cases, that occurs. Certainly, in a lot of places I've worked, that exactly does occur. Every at least sometimes you generally have team meetings once a week to discuss things within your particular team. But operational staff meetings once a month to discuss exactly those sorts of things. So it depends on the size of your organisation. If you're only a very small IT shop, then you just have to do things on the fly as you go along. But certainly convening meetings is a very common thing to do, and certainly one I'd definitely recommend that, particularly with new equipment coming into the marketplace. If something's useful for your environment, or if there are new vulnerabilities that are particularly applicable to technology that you have deployed, then absolutely needs to be discussed for sure. Need to think about external regulation impact they have on threat risk. The risk doesn't change essentially, but the impact of the data exfiltration implies that any vulnerabilities become a high risk to the business despite nothing else changing. Yeah, correct, Carl. So the risk, the actual threat risk itself doesn't change, but because of the external regulations, the impact becomes greater or potentially greater. Yeah, exactly. So, and that can change too. So as laws or regulations change, then yeah, that can change your risk analysis. So that again, as we were talking about, we need to make sure that we keep that risk analysis up to date. So it's that life cycle approach, but it's a really good point. Risk matrix is a subjective rating. Absolutely, it is subjective. It's any rating in a risk matrix is subjective based on your knowledge of your own system and your knowledge of the vulnerabilities and risks that you've identified. So you have to say, okay, if there's a risk, if it occurs, what impact is it going to have on my systems? What do I think that? How important do I think that is? So absolutely subjective rating. Yep. Oh, no, Alejandro, the risk matrix can be ported to a general view, absolutely. So it's not related to a risk matrix is applicable to any sort of situation, doesn't have to be physical security. Well, yeah, well, that's debatable, Stuart. I see what you're saying. It's still going to be your responsibility as the IT team or as the owner of that data. But what you're doing is you're transferring that risk, the management of that risk out to someone else to do it on your behalf. So no, you can't say, yeah, but we've outsourced it, it's someone else's responsibility. But you're still accepting the responsibility, but you're transferring the risk for someone else to do it on your behalf. Testing result indicating return operation not met. This is considered a failure as far as testing is concerned. Would you agree? Yes. Yes. If you run a test on your DRBCP and it doesn't hit your targets, then yep, it's a failure. Absolutely. And you would need to adjust your planning based on that. So DRBCP strategy when you have cloud computing, again, that's a, you know, you're transferring the risk elsewhere to another system somewhere else. So you would need to work in conjunction with whoever you outsource that to be able to come up with your DRBCP strategy. But there has to be, or they would provide you with a DRBCP strategy. Discuss the benefits and differences between cold site, warm site, and hot site. Well, I mean, cold site is just a backup, so it's no different to cold, warm, and hot, or active sort of standby. You've got either equipment waiting there but not fired up, ready to go. Warm site is it might be fired up, ready to go, but not cabled or doesn't have appropriate data on it. Hot site is obviously completely ready to fail over. That's the differences. The benefits are going to be determined by how important your information is and how important your critical services are and how quickly you want to get them back up again. So again, that's a bit of a depend answer. Cold sites can be great. You know, you might just say, all right, well, if something really goes bad, we'll just terminate all our connections over onto another data center. And I've worked in places where that's occurred. They've actually got an offline data center. When a big event occurred at the hot data center, we basically said, all right, well, we'll get our service provider to terminate all our connections on our cold data center, and we'll go and turn everything on the way it goes. And we had that up and running within a couple of hours. That might be acceptable, okay? Whereas you might say, well, that's not acceptable, I want it up in a couple of minutes, in which case then a warm site where everything is connected, but you just maybe have to transfer some data over, then that might be more acceptable. Or it may be say, well, no, we just want everything to fail over straight away, and that then becomes a hot site type thing. The other thing to consider is that sometimes when you have a hot site that is connected, it can actually be impacted by the incident depending on what it is. So if it's a technology type attack or a data network type attack, it could actually be taken out as well. So then you have to have another strategy. It's not just enough to have a hot site. You need to have a strategy to make sure that that hot site, even though it is hot, continues to provide the services that you want. Okay, so guys can answer that one, I would say. Oh, offensive security certified professional. To be honest, Steve, I don't know too much about that actual certification, so I'm probably not. I probably can't give you a definitive answer on that.
There's some anecdotal stuff in the chat and indeed in later questions that it's pretty highly regarded in pen testing, along with GPN and APT and CREST.
Oh, okay. So we've got pen testing there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Again, I'm not familiar with it. So, okay, CREST, that's one there. Oh, black swans. Okay, I see where you. Okay, now I get what you're talking about there. Okay, we've answered that one. So, Paul Douglas. That's interesting. That was my brother's names. Your risk changes. Yeah. Okay, so it's a comment on outsourcing. Your risk changes from hard disk drives or data corrupts to outsource or fails to provide service for whatever reason. Yep, exactly. Now, just risks are different, but again, you're still transferring that to someone else. So what's more important, vulnerability or threat? Well, they're equally important. The vulnerability is relatively important, obviously, because it represents a security hole. So if you've got a vulnerability, the best way is to try and patch it or mitigate against it. You can't really do much about the threat in terms of changing that threat. A threat is a threat. It is what it is, if you like. The only thing you can do is change the vulnerability to offset the likelihood or the impact of that particular threat. So from that point of view, the vulnerability is more important. Availability, most important in the triad, depends on the type of data. It is important. I wouldn't necessarily say that any of them are more important than the others. I think they are equally important. They all have, I guess there's certain circumstances where one may be said to be more important than the other. So say, for example, if it's just access to the internet for your users, then availability is generally more of an issue than the confidentiality and the integrity. But if you're talking about medical records, then confidentiality, integrity, and availability are all equally as important. So there may be times in which particularly availability may be slightly more important, but in general, I would say they are all equally important. So that one, so it's only exams only on the webinars and the contents in the slide decks with some corroboration from the other resources. What about the RPO and RTO in RA process? Let me go and turn to in RA process. I'm not sure what you're asking there, Anonymous. And Stuart, yeah, absolutely. Debate away. And that's what we're sort of saying before. There's so much scope. There's so much open to interpret or open to discussion based on your own organisation, your own experiences. And I think that's important for you guys to recognise as well, that everything that I've spoken about over the last few weeks is based on my experiences, my knowledge, and my bias. Of course, it has to be my bias. We all have a bias on everything. Even though we, sometimes like to think we're totally unbiased and we have an objective view on things, that's impossible. As human beings, we have a bias on everything we say. So everything that I've discussed in the last few weeks has certainly got my bias on that, based on my view of the world. And of course, you guys are going to have different views on the world, and that's fantastic, because then that opens up the area of discussion and allows us to learn from each other and therefore open up our own areas of knowledge and then change our bias, if that makes sense. So yeah, absolutely, no worries.
Personally, I'm just going to completely defer to you and abrogate all sorts of responsibility for my own administration of life and security. So thank you, Matt. That's what I came here for, and I'm glad I've got it.
No worries, always happy to help.
Beauty. All right, well, I'll quickly go through the exam info again. So I'll just go to my list first. So yes, it's available from Friday, and it will be available until 11:59 Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 11th of April. So just on 12 days to do it. You're required to complete all of the participation hurdle quizzes before you can access the exam and earn any certificates. And then once the exam period finishes, it'll be another week or two of just checking the exam, checking for outlier questions, and getting all of the admin work done before we actually release the certificates. Don't leave it until the last moment, because if there's any technical issues, we can't really help you unless it's a major one, like something to do with the Moodle or something like that. So yeah, 11th of April, midnight, do it before then. 40 multiple choice questions. You'll have only 1 hour to complete it, and the exam can only be attempted once. It's open book. You can save your progress and go and check out other readings, but once that countdown has started, it can't be stopped. So don't start it until you're certain you're ready, or as ready as you're likely to get. And of course, I'll send out a reminder email to let you know that it's open and that's about to close. Just a little another word on what to do if you're interested in further study. There's a couple of questions in there. Normally we have a CSU presentation during the short course, but we just couldn't make it happen this time. And that's probably a good thing, because as Matt said, our tutes have been running a little long, and that's fine by me. What I will do though is post some links that we have of previous sort of videos that we've made, sort of spruiking CSU in particular, and sort of give you an idea to some of the benefits of further education in the first place. We've got there's already some links about our cybersecurity masters programs, and the videos will be based around sort of financial benefits, sort of return on investment and those sorts of things. But personally, someone that doesn't particularly think that's the reason to do it. I just think it's, as Matt's been talking about, there's so much scope for interesting debate, interesting discussion of topics. Then if you're passionate about it, we'll go for it. And we really hope to see you at CSU in that. Other than that, yeah, please complete the course satisfaction survey. Helps me sort of measure how well we've done. And yeah, it's just been, other than that, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you to Matt so much. We've been getting heaps of comments as you've been going through the questions about saying thank you for this course. It's been well organised, well presented, so I'm looking forward to printing them off and showing them to you.
No worries. Thank you as well to you and Diane for all your assistance over the last 4 weeks. Been fantastic as ever.
Yeah. Thanks heaps, Diane, and thank you, of course, to all of you students who've been coming along and posting in the forums and in the chat and making it that much more richer an experience. So thank you, and thank you, Matt.